We'd like to check out the appliance of science on a regular basis here on the afternoon show. Today we hear from the Quadram Institute at the Research Park in Norwich. All you needed to know about intestinal microbiota, particularly if you have ME or know somebody who does. They're working on a project called Restore ME. Fascinating stuff. Have a listen to this. You might well want to change your diet.
Hello, my name is Simon Carding. I'm a professor at the University of East Anglia, Norwich Medical School, and I also run a program on gut microbes and health at the Quadram Institute on the Norwich Research Park. So the Quadram Institute is focused on understanding how food and microbes interact to promote health and prevent disease.
When did you first become interested in the workings of the human gut?
So I started off many years ago with an interest in immunology, and in particular the gut immune system and how that causes diseases such as inflammatory bowel disease, so that's ulcerative colitis and Crohn's disease. And the result of the studies, myself and other investigators discovered a role for gut microbes in triggering harmful immune responses in the gut, which lead to ultimately Crohn's disease or ulcerative colitis. So that set me on the path to discover more about microbiology in general and gut microbes in particular. So I now consider myself sort of a gut biologist, knowing a little bit about immunology and a little bit about microbiology.
So do you cringe then sometimes when you look at menus in restaurants or walk past certain fast food outlets? Do you think, oh my goodness, if only people knew?
Yes, so it's interesting. I think one of the things that we've come to appreciate about the importance of gut microbes in health is how much our lifestyle and behaviours influences the gut microbes and how they function and how they behave. And of course, diet is one of the major driving forces in promoting a healthy gut microbiota. So, you eat the wrong side of foods, you get the wrong type of reaction from your gut microbes, which can then make you unhealthy, may even lead to some diseases in the long term.
I was going to say this sounds like one of those long-term issues that if you don't nip it in the bud early days, it will progressively become worse. And gradual illnesses like that can pass us by. We don't notice them if they creep up on us. Is that a huge issue?
It is, actually. And one of the areas that we're very interested in the Quadram is aging and healthy aging and how the gut microbes can promote healthy aging throughout the lifespan. So we have projects looking at how a microbiome is established, a healthy microbiome is established in the gut in infants as soon as they're born. What things can we introduce that will promote and sustain a healthy microbiome for the rest of their lives? But at the other end of the lifespan, we're looking at how aging and change in the gut microbiome might lead to increased risk of developing certain diseases and in particular dementias. So can we stop or halt that progressive decline in mental health and physical health by intervening early, by changing the microbes that are in the gut, the way they behave, or the types of microbes there as well?
Well, why do you think many people would prefer facial scrubs and moisturising creams and maybe a little bit of cosmetic surgery rather than taking a closer look at the diets? Well, why do you think that is?
Yes, I think, of course, what we use to analyse gut microbes is stool samples, poo, and that has an immediate, sometimes adverse reaction. People don't want to know what's there. They don't comfortably handling or having people handle their stool or poo samples. So that's one factor. And I think the other thing is that with a healthy diet, it's not something you can just adopt at any one time and then revert back to your prior eating habits. It's a lifelong change that's needed, and that requires a huge amount of discipline. So, of course, the shortcut is going to have some surgery or using facial creams, etc., which, might be a short-term hit. But in the long term, you need to be looking after your gut microbes, and that requires a lot of devotion and commitment and sticking to a healthy diet, which is critically important.
Now, I understand you're leading a really fascinating project called Restore ME. Could you explain to me and our listeners what you're researching as a potential treatment for ME here?
Yes, so maybe it might help if I describe what ME is, first of all. So it's myalgic encephalomyelitis, or it's also called chronic fatigue syndrome. This is a particularly disabling and debilitating condition affecting, we estimate, around 250,000 people in the UK. 25% of those are young children. It's a lifelong condition, so it's multifactorial in terms of its origins. But it is most commonly occurs after a virus infection or if that can affect the gut or other parts of the body. I'd say it particularly affects young people who have had a previously healthy lifestyle and have been very active, and suddenly they become sort of lethargic, unable to exercise because it's too painful, there's too much fatigue. And one of the most, I think, disturbing things about the disease as well is the diagnosis. It can take many years for patients to receive a diagnosis. And as such, we are grossly underestimate the number of people affected by this disease in the UK. So there may be as many as 80% of patients that have yet to receive a diagnosis. And another important fact is that there are no effective treatments for this disease. And about a quarter of patients will go on to develop a very severe form of the disease where they can end up being bedbound, acutely sensitive to light and sound. So they're living alone in a dark room, protected from any exposure to many people. It's a very serious condition.
I seem to remember a time when there wasn't an enormous amount of empathy for people with ME. Was that because it wasn't particularly well understood, or did people think others might be trying to pull a fast one, have a few months off work?
Yes, yeah? It has suffered from the stigma of being a sort of psychiatric disease, and it's, just suck it up, get on with it, and you'll get better type of attitude from many clinicians. So it's only in the past 3 or 4 years, again through undertaking research, that we've come to understand, it's not all in the mind of patients. There actually are quite profound changes occurring in the body, which are contributing to the neurological symptoms, but also other aspects of the disease, the muscle fatigue, etc. But there is, unfortunately, still this stigma that patients have to face, that it's in their minds. It's not a real disease. It's just something, they can get over if they just got up off their bed, out of their bed, off the sofa, and just exercised. And of course, exercise is one of the things that makes the disease much worse.
And I understand you've been doing some trials. I think are they currently running with people in Norfolk?
So the Restore Me trial, which you've mentioned, is planned for in the Quadram Institute, and it will be hopefully starting later this year. And the premise behind it is that we think there are microbes that inhabit the gut of patients, in particular viruses, which we think trigger a cascade of events which leads to ultimately the disease. So what we're looking at doing is wholesale replacement of their gut micropopulations with a healthy donor microbiota sample, which will colonize them and hopefully alleviate some of the symptoms. So it's a clinical trial to determine the effectiveness, the efficacy of this particular type of therapy, which is called fecal microbiota transplantation or microbiota replacement therapy. There are various names for this. And we'll be assessing the impact of this on their levels of physical activity, but also their mental activity as well, to really get some accurate and quantitative data about the effectiveness. And of course, if it's a success, this opens up a whole new area of potential therapeutic treatments for treating ME.
I did hear on Dutch radio, it must have been about 18 months, 2 years ago, there was a feature, and I had to go and do a word check on that, because that was beyond my grasp of Dutch. I thought, surely they're not talking about poo donations, and sure enough, when I looked at the website and did a double check, they were. So is this something that could be rolled out here in the UK and here in Norfolk, that people would donate?
Absolutely. I mean, at the Quadram, we're establishing a donor stool bank for use for various interventions. I mean, I should say that, this is not many of our listeners may think, this is something very new, but actually originates back to the 4th century as part of Chinese medicine. And veterinarians have been using it since the 1700s to replace an abnormal population of microbes with a healthy one in cattle, for example. It's only in the 1950s that we started to do clinical trials. And for one particular disease, it's now an accepted therapy in the NHS, and this is to treat a particularly nasty infection called Clostridium difficile, which, if left untreated, can be fatal and is usually treated with rounds and rounds of antibiotics, etc., which are very expensive. But FMT in one single dose can have a cure rate of 90%. So this is really an example of how sort of therapies are developing, FMT is developing into mainstream practice, and there are trials currently running in the UK on looking at using this to treat other diseases like inflammatory bowel disease, for example. And the trial we're prepared, the Restore Me trial, with the first one in this part of the country, and to undertake FMT as a potential treatment for ME. And we will be recruiting patients from Norfolk and Suffolk for this trial.
What a way to make a living. You must be a very happy man in your job. It must be such a fascinating occupation. How does it feel on a daily basis, walking into work and going to somewhere like the Quadram Institute, which is well known the world over?
Well, so the Quadram Institute is a relatively new building, and it's an amazing facility. I mean, it's unique in that we have part of the Norfolk and Norwich University Hospital in the basement. They get endoscopy. And then we have research labs. So it really is an sort of exciting enterprise to really ensure that we can translate the things we find in the lab down into the basement to help deliver on patient care. I mean, Norwich Research Park is an amazing place as well because it has more microbiologists in one place than anywhere else in the UK. And whereas Quadram, we're interested in microbes that live in the gut, the John Innes Centre is interested in microbes that live in soil and in plants. Then the university, the UEA, is interested in microbes in the atmosphere and the oceans. So collective, there's this huge knowledge base and skill and expertise that really, I think, enhances what we can do in the Institute.
My thanks to Professor Simon Carding there from the Institute for chatting to us at the Norwich Research Park. We'll have more from them a little bit later on. And a big salute to all those working in the Quadram basement there. They were wonderful when I visited them.